Welcome to the Capitol Forum's Antitrust Interview Series, sponsored by Kroll On Track. My name is Karina Lubell, and I'm delighted to have here with me today Carla Hine, an antitrust partner in the Washington office of McDermott, Will & Emery. Today, Carla and I will be discussing the composition of the commission at the Federal Trade Commission and its impact on merger review. Carla, thanks so much for joining us.
Sure, happy to be here.
So first of all, let's start off with the news of Commissioner Brill's recent departure from the FTC. And that comes only a few months after Commissioner Wright left for another position. So now we're down to 3 commissioners on a commission that usually has 5. Is that an unusual situation?
It is. I think there have only been 2 times since 1980 where there's actually been only 3 commissioners at the commission. So it's not uncommon to have an open position, but we don't frequently have 2 open positions at the same time. So that is a little uncommon. That said, though, it's not uncommon to have situations where commissioners can't necessarily vote on a matter because maybe they're recused or something along those lines. So I remember in the aughts, around the 2005 timeframe, there was a lot of recusals among the commission. So you had instances where merger complaints or challenges were voted out with only a quorum of 2 commissioners. And it was also around that same time that the FTC adjusted their quorum rules to actually sort of better handle those situations, so they didn't have a situation where they couldn't in fact have a quorum. So previously they had to have a majority of commissioners to have a quorum, but then they revised the rules, I think it was around 2005 as well, to say that it had to be a majority of the commissioners that weren't recused. So it gave them a little bit more leeway. So you did have these situations where you did have a quorum of 2, essentially.
Well, so it sounds like the issue of having commissioners who had to recuse themselves is somewhat similar to having a vacancy, in that you could ultimately end up with only 2 or 3 commissioners who are able to decide a matter. But what happens now that we only have 3 acting commissioners if any of them have to recuse themselves?
So if any of them do need to recuse themselves, I mean, like I said, you can have a quorum of 2, so things can still, the FTC can still function, it can still operate, and there's no impediment even if there is a recusal situation or something like that. So I mean, the agency will continue to function, and I don't anticipate, and I think a lot of other folks don't anticipate, that the vacancies will be filled anytime soon, unfortunately, but the FTC's rules are sort of well placed to help them to continue functioning in the meantime. Now that said, obviously with fewer commissioners available, that means everybody's workload goes up. So that's a different problem to deal with, but like I said, the commission can still continue to operate sort of as normally as possible.
And actually, since you mentioned the workload, one of the things that I've heard from some commentators is that having fewer commissioners might actually make the commission more efficient. What's your reaction to that?
I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. There's a few complicating factors. One is the Sunshine Act. So the FTC is subject to the Sunshine Act. So if there's a quorum of FTC commissioners discussing FTC business, then they technically have to have an open meeting, which means that they have to provide notice of at least a week in advance and kind of make sure that they comply with certain rules and procedures. So in this situation, what that essentially means is that commissioners may not be able to talk to one another because a quorum being 2, if one commissioner sees another in the hallway, wants to talk about a matter that's maybe pending, that could technically be subject to the open meeting requirements. So I think that you've got that issue where maybe if there's something more complex or contested and the commissioners maybe want to talk about it sort of informally, that maybe they can't. And so they can always talk through their advisors, but still it kind of bogs down the, not necessarily the formal process, but maybe just sort of the informal ways in which the commissioners would interact. Also, I mean, there is the workload issue too. So with 3 commissioners, there's going to be more matters, presumably assuming a consistent workload. There's going to be more matters that each commissioner is going to be responsible for as the moving commissioner. So there's that component as well. Also, with Commissioner Brill's departure, she was sort of the the face, if you will, really at the forefront of a lot of privacy and international issues. And so not having somebody, having to spread that around amongst the remaining commissioners as well, I think is something else that, because it's such a hot topic.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's another commissioner that's well placed to take over that, or who's expressed interest in that area? Obviously not to the same extent she has,
Right.
but who could fill those shoes?
Right. I think that obviously the chairwoman, she's well versed in these issues, and I know that she's spoken on privacy issues and things like that in the past. Commissioner Olhausen is very well placed, just given her prior FTC experience and her private sector experience as well. So I think anybody could really kind of pick up that mantle. That said, though, and just given the fact that we're in a position where there's only 3 commissioners at the moment, I wouldn't expect to see the same level of interaction in public-facing events that you'd often see the commissioners at, just because they're going to be a little bit more strapped for time, and it's a little bit more difficult to, travel internationally to, speak in front of the European Commission or something or data privacy agencies, and when you've got so much to do back in the office. So I wouldn't expect there to be as much. I wouldn't expect there to be as much movement in terms of the FTC's sort of policy agenda, if you will.
Okay, well that makes sense.
Yeah.
What about from a merger perspective and from an investigative perspective? So not so much on the policy side of things, but the work that actually has to get done. Do you see, particularly it seems to me, given that we went from a commission that was composed of 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans to 2 Democrats and 1 Republican, that's not a serious change in the balance of powers. Do you see there being an impact on sort of the substantive decisions that the commission's making?
No, I don't think so. I think substantively, I think you'll see a lot of continuity in terms of the enforcement priorities generally, and just I don't think you're going to see necessarily like an uptick all of a sudden in more aggressive merger challenges or things like that. I think the agency will sort of maintain its sort of the same enforcement priorities that it has, and I think there's real continuity there. If anything, Commissioner Brill always, I think she had a pretty good reputation for making staff and making parties maybe sharpen their pencils a little bit on merger remedies in particular, a little bit more aggressive on merger remedies. And so I think maybe you'll see at the margins, you won't see as much of that, but the agency still is pretty, I don't want to say aggressive, but they're definitely looking out for consumers in the best way that they can, and so I don't think you'll see any get out of jail free cards coming out of this. So
well, and it seems like you had Commissioner Bill on the one hand, who was looking at deals with a lot of scrutiny and divestitures perhaps, or remedies in general, more skeptically than someone like Commissioner Wright, who was, I think, maybe somewhat easier to convince on the basis of economic analysis that a deal wouldn't have the same sort of anti-competitive effects. So I don't know what your thoughts, but it seems like those things almost balance each other out.
I think that's exactly right. So and with Commissioner Brill gone and Commissioner Wright gone, in some ways you've kind of got this really clear path kind of down the middle of the road in some ways, where the remaining commissioners are relatively like-minded, even though you have you have 2 democratically appointed and 1 Republican appointed, but they're pretty consistent in their approaches, at least based on my read of things. So I think you're right. It's a good way to put it. It's sort of a net wash, if you will. Yeah.
And I just realized that it's 3 women commissioners, which is, I don't know if you are familiar sort of historically, but it seems to me that that's somewhat unprecedented.
Yeah, I don't know historically if that's ever been true before, but yeah, it's an interesting time in that respect at the commission overall, just because before Commissioner Brill left, you had all of the commissioners were women, and all of the bureau director, which is still true, obviously, but you had 4 women as opposed to 3, and all of the bureau directors are women as well. So it's an interesting time historically in that respect. I don't believe that that's ever happened before at the commission.
And you said you think it's going to be a while before there are 2 new commissioners appointed. When are you thinking? Do we have to wait until we've got a new administration?
I think so. I mean, it's such a short legislative year with campaigning and whatnot. It's just a shortened schedule within Congress, and I mean, Commissioner Wright's been gone, I think, almost 7 months now, thereabouts. Yeah, and no one's even been named. I just don't think it's a high priority, especially in this environment where, I mean, we're looking at trying to get Supreme Court justices, through the hearing process, and so with the shortened schedule and just coupled with the current, like I said, the current political environment, I don't see this happening anytime before January 2017.
How long? Do you have a sense of how long it takes for a commissioner obviously doesn't need to go through the same process that a Supreme Court nominee does, but presumably there's some amount of time in identifying someone and getting them cleared. Do you have a sense of how long that might take?
That's I'm trying to think historically how long that's taken in the past. And I know that there have been some names kicked around, but I would say, start to finish, it's probably a few months thereabouts. It kind of depends on what other priorities there are in any given time, and whether or not somebody feels like there's a real need. But like I said, if the commission continues to operate and they can still function, there may not just be a huge push or a high priority on filling those spots in the meantime. Yeah.
Is there anyone in particular, or maybe a particular profile that you'd like to see on the commission, an area maybe where they're lacking, obviously privacy now that Commissioner Brill stepped down, but are there any other areas you think that they'll be looking to fill?
I mean, I think they'll probably continue in the same vein that they always have, which is, folks who have been around these competition and consumer protection issues in their careers generally, and so I don't think there'll be much deviation or much sort of novelty in how they approach the nomination process in terms of who they think of to replace Wright and Brill. And somebody, I think in some ways they'll probably kind of look for similar qualities in the sense that Wright had an econ background, and I think that's something that they'll continue to put in place, especially it's such an integral part of the commission. And then with Brill, her Attorney General and state experience, I think, is another area that kind of it was a good complement to the composition of the commission. So
sure.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like we've got the three commissioners for at least the foreseeable future. Right. As counsel to a number of parties who go before the FTC, is there anything that you do differently, knowing that there are only 3 commissioners and these 3 commissioners in particular?
Not necessarily in terms of defense and arguments and things like that, but probably we always try to be efficient in those meetings and in that process when you're at that level and talking to commissioners and that you've only got so much time. But I think even more so putting an even greater emphasis on that, making sure that your papers are in your advocacy pieces are to the commissioners well in advance, making sure that they're as streamlined as possible. That way you can make the process as efficient for them as well. And so like I said, I mean, it's something you always want to do, but I think that I would put particular emphasis on that now, knowing that you're only going to have an attorney advisor or commissioner's time for so long, whether it's how long they have your white paper in front of them or whether it's the time at the table, face to face. But in any event, just like I said, making that as useful for both you and them as you can.
And you only have 3 shots.
Exactly.
Instead of 5, you've got to get it right.
Exactly right. Yeah. But otherwise, in terms of substance, though, I don't see any real need to sort of shift trajectory or shift approach.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Carla, I think that actually wraps up our time this morning, but it was great to chat with you on the composition of the commission at the FTC, and I look forward to talking again soon.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity.